I'm Joanne Blaze with the Special Education Resolution Center, and I'm here today to welcome you. We're so excited that you've joined our video presentations, our Wisdom Wednesdays. And once a month, we're offering different topics that we think could be useful to schools and to parents in Oklahoma. One of the things we're doing is transcribing these and then recording them and archiving them on our website. Our website is www.okserc.org. And we believe that we're presenting for you today a quality webinar, but in the future, you may have someone with behavior, maybe you have a principal or a superintendent or a teacher or a parent who might need to listen to what are behavioral concepts and how is that looked at as being a disability. We have today with us Dr. Mary Ann Shepard. She's been working in behavior in Oklahoma for a long time. She's one of ours. She went to Oklahoma State. She's going to tell you a little bit about her background. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Mary Ann.
Hi, thank you so much, Joanne. Yes, as Joanne said, I grew up in Oklahoma, in far western Oklahoma. So I am originally from Oklahoma. I did my undergraduate at Southwestern Oklahoma State University in Weatherford. And then I went on to get my doctorate at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater. And after getting my doctorate, or as part of getting my doctorate, we are required to go on internships and kind of similar to medical school, like your residency, all except ours is called a postdoctoral fellowship. And so for my internship, I went to the May Institute just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and I worked in a school with children with severe developmental disabilities, neurological disabilities, or even brain injury, traumatic brain injury, and severe autism. And then after that, I moved to just outside of Baltimore, Maryland, and I had my postdoctoral fellowship at the Kennedy Krieger Institute. And while I was there, I worked primarily in outpatient parent and family training or teaching on how to respond and deal with behavioral concerns in the home environment. My original training was as a school psychologist. So I kind of have three licenses or areas of training. So one of my areas of training is school-based as a school psychologist. So I'm well-versed in kind of the school aspect of responding to behavioral challenges, education law, and how education law and medical psychological practice intersect. And then I also have my BCBA. So BCBAs tend to specialize in working with children with autism, but it's a specific certification that is a specialty within the field of school psychology, or within the field of psychology. And then I also have my license as a psychologist to work in the outpatient setting in the state of Oklahoma. So I have three different kind of licenses and areas of practice or specialty. When I came back to Oklahoma, I initially went back to Southwestern and taught for a year before life brought me back to Oklahoma City, where I taught at the university at UCO in Edmond. I don't know why I cannot think of it right now. I might be a little nervous, guys, and it's hard when you're in your room by yourself, but I taught at UCO in Edmond. And then life just led me back to the private practice setting. I missed working with the families, I missed working with the kids, and I missed kind of being in the weeds. And so I had the opportunity to start a behavioral clinic in Yukon, Oklahoma. I joined an existing practice that has speech therapy, physical therapy, and occupational therapy, but I came in to start their behavioral therapy clinic. And we have grown from a department of 1 to a department of close to 30, and we are now at 3 locations. And OPTC as a whole has grown. So the organization that I work for is Oklahoma Pediatric Therapy Center. We have locations in Yukon, North Oklahoma City, and El Reno. Our El Reno office just opened. So if you're from Western Oklahoma, that's a new resource to our families out west. And so what I do on a daily basis now is I do diagnostic assessments of children. So I'm looking for autism, ADHD, developmental disabilities, anxiety, depression, conduct disorder, or oppositional defiant disorder. So I'm looking at those comprehensive diagnostic assessments, but I also continue to do parent training and parent therapy, where we address behavioral concerns as we go. And so kind of just a lot of things that I work on and do. But one of the things that I'm constantly talking to parents about, that behavior is a disability. So we're familiar with vision disabilities. So if you can't see, we put glasses on and we can measure that. We measure that by your verbal report. So, they put things up on the screen and you tell the letters, and based on how you respond is how we know what you can see. And then we treat that with glasses or contacts, or, if necessary, surgery, or, some kind of vision correction. But we can't see what you can see. I can't get inside your little eyes and see what you can see. I rely on you telling me what you can see. The same with a hearing disability. We can't necessarily hear what someone else can hear, but we rely on watching their head turn, or, raising your hand when you hear the sound, whatever that is, to know what someone can hear. So those are two types of disabilities that are widely accepted, whether it's a hearing disability or a vision disability, where we rely on a verbal report. But then we take steps to address that. We don't just say, oh, well, you're not trying hard enough to see, or you're not trying hard enough to hear. We say, okay, we need to do something about that. And our response to those are things like corrective lenses or hearing aid. Similarly with physical disabilities, often we can see, not always, but a lot of times you can see physical disabilities, or measure those physical disabilities. Well, my role as a psychologist is to measure the behavioral disabilities. So behavior is a disability. And when we see behavioral concerns, we know that that's a disability. And so some of the disabilities that I often look at are autism or ADHD. And in this presentation, we're going to talk about those disabilities in a little more depth on how are they actually a disability, and what can we see and what can we measure. Then we're going to go on to look at the difference between skill versus performance deficits, because sometimes we can do things, we just don't want to do things because they're hard, because it's harder for us than other kids. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. And we're going to talk about the different types of interventions that you might do based on that type of disability. We're going to talk about, you might have heard of an FBA or behavior intervention plan. And so we're going to talk about FBAs and behavior intervention plans. Now, to be able to administer an FBA or to design a behavior intervention plan, that requires a little bit more than a 1-hour overview, but we are going to talk about that just a little bit. And we're going to talk about our resources for parents. But one of the biggest things that I want everyone to come away from this presentation with is realizing that behavior problems are not just naughty kids. Even if we can't see it, and even if intellectually they are of average intelligence, if they have a true underlying behavioral disability, they're not just willfully being naughty. It's the environment or their neurological functioning that is supporting that behavior. So when we look at autism, autism itself is a neurodevelopmental disorder. So most all of us that are watching this presentation are familiar with Oklahoma roads, and I'm not going to talk about them in a bad way. Oklahoma roads are set up on a grid. So most roads go north and south or east and west, and approximately every mile you have a new road. And something that's interesting, especially about Western Oklahoma, is approximately every 15 miles, you have a highway, and approximately every so often you have like major 4-lane roads, and we have a very good infrastructure throughout our state that allows us to navigate easily through the country, through the cities, because everything's set on a grid. Well, take an Oklahoma girl and put her in Boston, Massachusetts, where it's like spaghetti. Somebody just threw down a pile of spaghetti and said, that's where we're going to put the roads. They're going to go this way and that way and turn this way. And if you want to get from here to here, you might have to like do 5 different things to get there. So when we look at our brains were designed similar to Oklahoma roads, okay? Even though it's not on a grid system, they are clear pathways. There are specific ways in which every brain gets information from point A to point B, and every brain is organized this same way. But when we look at autism or any other neurological disability, including ADHD or even depression, the brain looks different. And we can see that on different types of imaging, but it's not something that I can just look at somebody and say, oh yeah, that child has autism, or oh yeah, that child has ADHD. I cannot visually look at them. I have to measure, just like with a vision disability, I have to measure what they're reporting to me. I have to measure their behavior. I have to measure how they respond to specific things to see how their brain is processing that information. So what we do know, when we are able to take pictures of the brain and do things through either MRIs or PET scans or functional MRIs or EEGs, what we can see, not EEG, anyways, yes, EEGs, EEG and EKG. Not doing well today, guys. Should have drank more coffee. What we can see are the structural differences within the brain. So what's interesting is the amygdala, a specific part of the brain, seems to be larger in children with autism versus those that don't have autism. And so the amygdala is important in controlling emotional regulation. Okay. And the amygdala does a lot of things, but one of the things that is important for us to know is that that amygdala helps us to regulate our emotions. Okay. The hippocampus, which is in charge of memory, is much larger. So that's why if you watch some of the stereotypic things on autism, you'll see things like Rain Man or something like that, where they can have this memory that is unusual in relation to the normal population, to normal brain functioning. Their cerebellum, so this is kind of the wrinkly part of the brain that you guys see when you look at a brain. So like your amygdala and your hippocampus, they're smooth and they're on the inside of the brain. They're little different structures, but the wrinkly part that you see when you look at the brain, that's called your cerebellum. And that size, that part of the brain is actually smaller. And there are also the cerebellum is also back here, is smaller. I'm getting all of my information confused today, but you can see these structural differences, okay? The severity of those structural differences are going to impact whether you have mild autism or more severe autism. Also, when we're going through our brains, like I said, there's clear pathways and this clear structure, and we're very efficient. We use a lot of interstates. So I can get straight from point A to point B very efficiently. But individuals with autism, their brain doesn't look the same. So you can see here that the typical child, we have a good interstate system here on the left side of your screen with that typical child. But when we look at a child with autism, it's not as clearly, the information is not flowing. It's not as smooth. And so that means to get information from point A to point B, if we need to send a lot of information, well, only so much information can go through there. And so it looks a lot different. And this is something that we can see the difference. Also, over here, I'm going to move my head over just a bit. If we look at our amygdala growth in autism, you can see that initially the amygdala of a child with autism is higher than that of a neurotypical child, but then it's like development just stops and it doesn't progress. And then by the time we get to adolescence or adulthood, you can see that the amygdala of a neurotypical brain is significantly larger than that of a child or an individual with autism. And so in these images, we can see that there are differences in the brain. So why is this important? The reason this is important is because the amygdala, again, controls our emotions. And that means that it's not just because they want to. It's not just because they can. It's not just because they think it's funny. Sometimes kids do laugh when they're in the middle of a behavioral outburst, and they look at it and they think it's funny. Well, it may be funny to them. Have you ever laughed in like the movie Scream? Or in a horror movie where something happens and you kind of take yourself out of it and you're like, wow, this is kind of funny. If you just step back and look at it in another view. And so sometimes because of that difference in the way that the brain is developing, their response to challenging behavior may be different than a neurotypical child's response is. So just because we cannot see the differences, you can put two children, even twins, with one with autism and one without autism. And if you just take a picture, you can't tell the difference between the two. But when we look inside their brains, the way that their brain is processing information is different. And because of that, that's why we see some of the behaviors that are common to autism, like rocking or flapping or sensitivity to sound or sight or texture, having textures, even food texture. Because your somatosensory cortex goes right across the middle part of your brain right here. And if for whatever reason, your brain, all of that information isn't organized clearly or appropriately, if all of that isn't organized appropriately, then the communication across the brain for things like texture or taste or sound isn't processed the same as it is in our brains. And so we can all agree that the sound of nails on chalkboard or really high-pitched beep is really aversive, and we might cover our ears with that. But if your brain is more sensitive, there may be other sounds like the flushing of a toilet or a fire truck or the buzzing of lights that makes you cover your ears or you find aversive. We can all also agree that wool, the texture of wool on our skin is not comfortable, it's itchy. But if for whatever reason your somatosensory cortex is affected, you may find that a lot of clothing textures are really itchy and really aversive. So again, we're measuring the behavior to see what's happening in the brain. Also, when we're looking at ADHD in the brain, a lot of times in autism, we can all kind of agree, especially on that moderate to severe range. Yeah, they have a disability. We can all agree on that. It's with autism and high functioning autism and kind of the Asperger's range that sometimes we don't fully understand how the deficits in the brain and the delays in the brain really are impacting their social skills, their compliance, their understanding of the world, that rigid behavior that can sometimes be so extremely frustrating, that can appear to be just being hard-headed or stubborn or not trying, awkward. The same with ADHD. With ADHD, we can agree on those extreme ends and with some of the behaviors that there's some things that are different there. But ADHD, I think, because of where the brain is affected and what is affected in the brain, is one of the behavioral disorders that is most likely to be attributed to being willful. So the part of the brain that is affected by ADHD is this frontal lobe. So your brain is kind of like in this shape, like this, and you kind of have this part right here is right behind your forehead. Okay. And that part of the brain is the area of the brain that is affected the most by individuals diagnosed with ADHD. There are a lot of things that contribute to the development of ADHD, including experiences that happen in utero, plus genetics, and a lot of things can contribute to whether a child goes on to develop ADHD or not. But what we do know is that it is a disability. And the part of the brain, like I said, is the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is responsible for organizing. information. So, back here you have your vision, and on your left side you have your auditory information and kind of language. And so your brain, again, is very organized. But right here, this part of your brain is like your secretary. And that's the part of the brain that is most impacted in ADHD. And that part of the brain is what's responsible for helping us to filter information. And so right now I'm filtering a lot of information to keep me focused and not distracted. I'm having to filter out any emails that are popping up on my screen or text messages, any sounds that I hear from the background. And I'm having to really focus on pay attention, right? So I'm filtering out that other information to keep me focused. It also helps with time management. How much time do I need to budget towards this so that I'll have enough time to do my other tasks later in the day. It's also responsible for impulse control. So if anybody has some road rage, maybe myself, when you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off or follows you too closely or does some other absurd thing on the road, you might get a little irritable. And when you get irritable, you might think of all the things that you would like to say and do or teach to the person either in front of or behind you. You might slam on your brakes and do a little brake check. You might tailgate them just a little closer. You may cut them off. You may tell them have a good day. You may do a lot of things, but what you also do simultaneously is weigh out the consequences of that. So if I do this, what are the consequences? And we're able to say, well, that would feel good in the moment, but it might cause a wreck, or, they might pull a gun on me. That's happened a lot lately. And so you're able to think about what are the consequences, and you're able to filter that out. But if your frontal lobe is not working properly, then you have a hard time filtering. And anything that comes up, you're like, squirrel, 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 oh, do that. And oh, start on that. And oh, I'm going to work on this task. And then 3 hours later, you're still working on that Lego task and you totally forgot to do your homework. And so you're unable to filter you have a hard time with organizing information. Also, that impulse control, you see it, you think it, you do it. Somebody offends you, you say it, and you move on. It just goes very fast. And then afterwards, many times you feel remorseful. And so if you do something on impulse, and I think as adults, we can relate to this a little more than some of that aggressive type things. But if you buy something, have you ever had buyer's remorse and you're like, ooh, I kind of bought that on impulse and now I feel remorseful about it? Well, kids don't necessarily get buyer's remorse because they don't have to budget, but what they do get is, aggression remorse. And so maybe they wanted that toy and so they just hit somebody to get that toy, and then they hit them and then they're like, ooh, that was the wrong choice. And so they really are sorry that they did that. Or maybe they ran too fast and they broke something and they really are sorry. But in the moment, it seemed like a good idea and their brain didn't go fast enough to tell them that that was a poor choice. Well, we do know that variations of ADHD are not just prevalent in kids, but they are prevalent and persist into adulthood, regardless if you can still see the behavioral effects. And so what you see in kids that have ADHD up to adulthood is that maybe they're less impulsive physically, but maybe more impulsive with their words and what they say. So they might be a little hotter in arguments. They may also be more impulsive in purchasing and struggle more with credit card debt or things like that. They may be have more difficulty budgeting their time, or more forgetful, chronically late because of that difficulty with budgeting their time. And so those are some of the variations that you might see, or some of the behavioral effects into adulthood. A lot of you are probably like, well, I have ADHD. It really is looking at how do you deviate from the normal population. So we all struggle with all of these things, but how far do you deviate or differ from those others that are your age? So one thing that is important is the frontal lobe, like I said, is going too slow, and it's not processing information fast enough. It's not making decisions fast enough. It's not organizing information well enough. And so that's why we give individuals stimulant medication. By prescribing stimulant medication, what it does is it speeds up that frontal lobe of the brain, which improves that impulse control, because then you can think before you can speak. Then you can filter out information when your filter is moving faster. But what we do know is also that evidence suggests that stimulant medication does produce a long-term normalization in the brain structure and function. So a lot of people are hesitant about using stimulant medication in kids. Now, you don't want to use stimulant medication in a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old or something like that. But, when you're talking, 7, 8, 9, then stimulant medication can produce some normalization in the brain structure. As far as side effects of medication, that's something that they would need to talk to their psychiatrist or their pediatrician about. But we do have a lot of evidence on the effectiveness of medication. And there are a lot of different medications available now. They have both stimulant medication and non-stimulant medication to help address some of the potential side effects. The imaging here isn't great, but there is less neuroimaging on ADHD than there is on autism. But you can see that if you were to look into neuroimaging, that there are structural differences in the brain. Those are going to be the main ones that we're going to talk about today. But learning disabilities are also a neurological condition. And I wanted to touch on those very briefly because a lot of times individuals think that kids that have a hard time learning to read or write or do mathematics, understand mathematics, sometimes that's attributed to being lazy or not trying hard enough, especially on the milder ends of disabilities. And like we talked about with autism or ADHD, we can all agree on the extremes. It's when we are in the more mild forms of the disabilities that behavior may be attributed to being naughty or to being lazy. But running is hard. And I think we can all agree that running is hard, unless we have any marathon runners in here. Running tends to be something that is difficult for all of us. And so we tend to avoid tasks that are difficult. Right now, it's tax season. And unless you have an accountant who's doing your taxes for you, you might be avoiding doing your taxes because it's difficult, it's hard. And so you think of other things to do. Cleaning your house is not fun and it's hard. And so just like adults, children are going to avoid tasks that are hard or difficult. So kids might avoid tasks like math or reading or writing because it is hard. It doesn't mean that they're lazy, but for them, it is hard, and it may be harder for them due to an underlying neurological condition than other kids. And so if you have a back injury or any other kind of, as we are all getting older and aches and pains and things like that, if you have any kind of injury, and someone is forcing you to go outside in the cold and run, you might become a little combative as well. So sometimes we see that individuals with learning disabilities not only can appear lazy, but they might also get a little combative or a little angry when we're pushing them really hard in order to avoid or escape that task. So one of the things that I want all of us to know is that a lot of disabilities are invisible. So we can't necessarily see the brain, but our reaction to them is not. So never assume that a behavior isn't the result of a skill deficit. So you always want to look at a skill deficit. And I want to explain this because, like I said, impulse control is hard. Okay, so how long can you sit still? Okay, so let's all just do a little task real quick. And I want everybody to sit still for as long as you can. Don't move. Okay, so that was 30 seconds. Who Does anybody want to raise their hand? Did anyone find that 30 seconds of sitting perfectly still difficult? It's so hard with a webinar. Joanne did. So sometimes it's really hard to sit perfectly still. Did anybody find your mind wandering, and you're wanting to, okay, look at your phone, or, maybe check an email that you just saw pop up? Did anybody have any messages or emails, or even your Apple Watch? Oh goodness, that Apple Watch is a nightmare. Did anybody have any instances where they, got distracted? Maybe your filter was off. Okay, so that was 30 seconds where we were doing that. But what I want you to challenge kids in your class is have them all sit still. Okay, yeah, 30 seconds felt so much longer. Have them sit still. Watch how long some of your kids can sit. And this is evident if you play the quiet game in your class. The kids that can sit for a long time, well, those are your kids that have good impulse control and good frontal lobe functioning. But the kids that are more likely to touch things, or blurt out something, or start fidgeting, or playing with their friend next to them, those are the ones that they have more of a skill deficit. Again, frontal lobe isn't able to filter or control as well those impulses. If you are bored and you want to watch something on YouTube, you can also watch the marshmallow test, which is where they set a marshmallow in front of kids, and they have them use their impulse control to wait. So this seems really straightforward, but when you're talking impulse control and you're doing a lecture in your classroom and you have a child who's really disruptive, is that disruption because they are naughty and have a hard time focusing, or is that disruption because their frontal lobe is not functioning as well and they have a disability that we need to address the underlying skill deficit that is existing? So, make sure before you say this is a behavioral problem that the child can engage in the correct behavior first. So can they sit still for 5 minutes? Set them at their desk. And can they sit still? Not with a reward. Just sit them there and say, I need you to sit on this square for 5 minutes. And if they can't sit on a square or sit at their desk for 5 minutes, and then you add reinforcement, say, okay, now I want you to sit here. And if you sit here for 5 minutes, you can earn this cookie that I've got right here. Okay. Now, if they can do that, okay, they can do it with motivation, but how much motivation did that take? So let's go back to our running. I want you to go outside right now and run a mile. Okay. Anybody signing up to go run your mile? Especially in this cold weather. Okay, now I want you to go run a mile, and I'll pay anybody who can demonstrate that they ran a mile $50. Now who's signing up to get out there and run that mile? Somebody says still no. Is anybody going for $50? Anybody going for 100? Okay, we got one that's okay. I'll go for 100. Amy says, yes, I'm going for $100. Okay, so see, we all have a bit of a skill deficit in running a mile, but with sufficient motivation, yeah, we can get there. So Teresa might get a little combative if I tried to get her to go out there and run. No, it has to be running. So you can see some of us have a skill deficit and some of us have a performance deficit. So some of us can go run a mile and will with sufficient motivation, but are not going to choose to run a mile. Whereas others, it really is an underlying skill deficit. So what happens is sometimes we attribute these behavioral problems to the wrong type of problem. We say, well, they just won't sit still, but we never look to see, can they sit still? They won't share with their friend, but can they share with their friend? They always hit, well, can they ask? Oh, well, sometimes, okay, but how much effort does it take them to ask? Because if their brain isn't working right on the left side, how much effort is it to ask versus how much effort is it to hit? And what's the effectiveness of the two of those? Because the effort to hit is very low and it's very effective. The effort to find my words, can I have that toy, may be hard for a child with a communication delay, and it might not always work. And so you really have to look at, can they do the skill and how much effort does it require them to do that skill? What was happening in the across the country is that because of behavioral challenges, students were, and safety concerns and a lot of things, sometimes students were put on a reduced day. And so because the behavior was difficult to manage in the school, or in the classroom setting, students were put on a reduced day. Oklahoma came out with a memo that was released by Todd Laughlin. And this is the part that I want to address for the remainder of our time. And it says that students with disabilities must attend school for the same number of hours and minutes as non-disabled students. So what we've established is that behavior is a disability. And so if the behavior can be attributed to ADHD, autism, a learning disability, anything like that, if it is a disability, then they are entitled to the same number of hours and minutes as non-disabled students. If we shorten that school day, so that includes sending them home early or calling the parents to come pick them up, or having them sit in the office all day, or in school suspension, all of these things, by shortening a student's school day, it raises issues regarding the provision of that access to a free and appropriate public education under IDEA, as well as, and this is an area that you want to be very clear about, is it can be considered potential discrimination. So if you are removing a child or not allowing them access to activities, then it can be discriminating based on disability. So be very careful there, knowing that you could be putting, by shortening a student's school day, or by sending them to the office, or restricting their access to the general education curriculum or their IEP curriculum, that you could be putting yourself at risk under FAPE or IDEA or 504. If for some reason they do have a shortened school day, that needs to be part of an IEP discussion. But what's important is that IEP teams should exercise extreme caution, or exercise caution when doing this, because it does open you to risk for violating one of those laws that we have. If you do use this as a strategy, or find that it is something that is appropriate for your particular situation, it cannot be as a form of punishment or in lieu of suspension or an expulsion. So if you send a student home, you need to make sure that that is a suspension, and that you're documenting those days. And you cannot send them home as a consequence. You can't say, because you did this, your consequence, your punishment is reduced day. Because that would be like me telling you, because you hit me and threw a fit, you no longer have to run today. I'd be like, okay, I'll hit you again tomorrow, because I don't want to go out in the cold tomorrow, because it's going to be like -6 degrees. So what do I have to do to get out of running tomorrow? Okay, hit. Okay, got it. So I show up tomorrow and you show up, and what am I going to do? Well, I'm getting out my punching gloves, because if hitting is effective and it is sending me home where I don't have to work as hard, and I don't have to run or whatever, or read, or whatever it is that they're trying to avoid, that form of punishment can actually be reinforcing the behavior. In the case of a student whose behavior impedes the learning or that of others, you must include positive behavioral interventions. And so one of the things I mentioned, that I'm a BCBA, and one of the things that is in our ethical guidelines is punishment can never be our first step. You have to make sure that you're using other positive strategies to address the challenging behavior? How are you reinforcing the child in the classroom? How are you supporting their day? How are you supporting their disability? What interventions are in place to support the skill deficits that they may have? And also, one last thing, repeated use of disciplinary actions, whatever those disciplinary actions, may suggest that a child with a disability is not receiving appropriate behavioral interventions and supports. And so if you find that you're constantly having to send a child home or send the child to the office, or, you know, implement some kind of punishment strategy, consequence strategy, then that in and of itself is a sign that your strategies are not sufficient for addressing the behavioral challenges that that particular student or child may have. So there are two types of things that you guys can come at disabilities with. So the first type of kind of tool that you can use are skill-based interventions. So can they do the skill? And this is important to look at for all kinds of skills. Can they even sit quietly for 5 minutes? Can they sit on a square if they're required to sit on a square? Can they share? Can they take turns? Can they ask a friend to play? Can they engage in the behavior? Can they, just like with instructional things, and I think we're really good at this with instructional, do they know their letters? Do they know their letter names? Do they know their letter sounds? Can they blend letters? Can they read at a first grade level? Can they read at a second grade level? What, you know, can they add single digit, add double digit, add with regrouping, you know, can we add? We're really good at assessing those skills, but it does require the same type of skill assessment to see, can they engage in the correct behavior? So if they're engaging in an incorrect behavior, what behavior is it that they need to do, and can they do it? And the next thing that you want to assess are performance deficits. So if they can do it, what does it take to get them to do it? So if you can run, how much money does it take to get you to run? Well, we're motivated by money. So $50 for some of you, $100 for others. And for some of you guys, I'm probably going to have to pull out, you know, $500. But what level of motivation does it take? So can they use their words to request or to share or whatever? Yes. Okay. How much motivation does it take? Can they sit in their chair still without disturbing the person next to them? Okay. Yes, they can do it. How long? And under what circumstances? Okay. So if it's that they can't do it, we need to find a skill-based intervention. We're going to talk about that in a minute. If it's that they can do it, but it's hard, and it's easier to do the wrong thing than it is to do the right thing, because that's how it always is. It's always easier to make the wrong choice. It is much easier for me to eat my cookie right here than it is for me to go wash the fruit and eat the fruit from the fridge, right? I'm going for the cookie. The hard choice is always easier. What does it take to motivate the child to do the right choice? And that is where behavior intervention gets fun, not tricky. So when you're looking at behavior intervention and your functional behavior intervention plans, if you're shortening a school day, you're probably going to need to put in place an FBA and a behavior intervention plan. You're assessing the function of the behavior. So is the function of the behavior attention? Is the function that they are trying to get attention from parents, they're trying to get attention from teachers, they're trying to get attention from their peers, depending on their age. It could be that they're kind of the class clown. They like that attention from their peers. They like attention from parents. So is it that they're trying to get that attention from others? Is it that they're trying to escape? Some tasks are hard. So we talked about that. Teresa mentioned she can't run. She has a foot issue. So she's going to be escaping a running task. If I can't add or read, I may be trying to escape reading class. And my escape function may look, or my escape behavior may look like aggression or disruption. It may look like quiet crying or school refusal. So some kids are trying to escape. Some kids are trying to get tangible items. So things like a cookie or things like, you know, access to a video game or access to free time in the classroom, access to other things. And then some behaviors are due to automatic sensory maintained behavior. So, you know, if you've watched, I don't sit still. You can tell I have some ADHD problems because my little chair is just wiggling away right here. But, you know, we do things like this to self-soothe. And so sometimes kids, they're humming along, just clicking their tongue and humming and carrying on, and they're talking and fidgeting and swinging their legs and kicking their desk. And they're like the one in the church pew that their foot is just going 100 miles an hour and you're like, the whole building's shaking. Those are sensory related things. And the individual chewing their nails, they may or may not even know that they're doing it and that it's disruptive to those around them, but they're just doing it because it provides this sensory sensation. So what you're looking at with a functional behavior assessment is identifying the function of the behavior, because if we can identify the function of the behavior, then we're able to come up with a more sustainable behavioral intervention plan. And so when you think about function of behavior, you're thinking about what is the purpose of the behavior? Why are they doing this? Why are they disrupting class? So are they disrupting class because they want attention? Are they disrupting class because they want to get out of reading? Or are they disrupting class because they want to go hang out and play with the toys in the office while they wait to talk to the principal? Okay. So what purpose does that behavior serve? Or are they engaging in the behavior because they get sent home? And if they get sent home, they get to play on the Xbox or the Switch. If they get sent home from school, they get to hang out at mom's office while she works. And it just so happens that her coworkers are really cool. Or they get to stay with grandma while they're at home. Or they, you know, get to get out of reading and mom helps them do the reading instead of doing the reading as a group. So when you're looking at behavior function, by treating that function of the behavior, you can identify, okay, how are we going to replace this behavior? If they want time on the Xbox, if that's what the function of the behavior is, if it's all about Xbox time or all about attention, how can we build that in to the behavior that we want? So if they're engaging in the behavior to get out of school, to go play on the Xbox, how can we then work with the parents or partner with, you know, resources that we have in the school to get them some game time at school? And it may not be that you have an Xbox, but you probably have an iPad or a computer with some cool games. And so how can we then flip the sequence here? So instead of engaging in challenging behavior to get sent home, to get Xbox time, now we engage in the correct behavior to get Xbox time or to get game time. You can see that there's that direct link between things, but often what we do is we focus on the topography instead of focusing on the function of the behavior. We tend to focus on the topography of the behavior. And when we're looking at the topography of the behavior, then we're looking at, okay, the yell and scream and tantrum. Well, by saying a yell and scream and tantrum, every time they yell, scream, and tantrum, I'm going to do this. Every time they're aggressive, they're going to get sent to the office. Or every time they're aggressive, they're going to have to write a letter of apology. Whatever that is, if we're looking at the topography, what the behavior looks like, it doesn't tell us anything about what's going to be effective as an intervention. But if we look at the purpose, they're engaging in this to get out of the classroom. Okay, now we can decide how we're going to intervene on this. They're engaging in this to get attention from their peers. Okay, if they're engaging in this to get attention from their peers, now we can treat it. But if we just look at, okay, how do we punish tantrum behavior? I don't know, it depends on why. So you want the why behind the what, not what the behavior is. So when you're looking at a functional behavior assessment, you should have someone at your school or in your district who is trained in administering functional behavior assessments. And functional behavior assessments often are multi-component. So they're going to involve those interviews, observing the behavior, and collecting some data on the behavior. They're most often conducted by a behavior specialist, a BCBA, or a school psychologist, someone who has had some sort of formal training in functional behavior assessment. They are often conducted as part of an IEP process to develop those behavior intervention plans. So like we said, if you're just looking at what the behavior is, tantrum, aggression, school refusal, that doesn't tell us how to treat it. And so when we're looking at how to treat it, we have to know what purpose the behavior serves, what's the function of the behavior, because in knowing what the function of the behavior is, that's how we really develop a comprehensive behavior intervention plan that has more lasting effects to treat the source and the root of the problem behavior. Functional behavior assessments can be conducted across a lot of different settings, and you can conduct them at the school, but you can also utilize parents in conducting those, especially if you're using restricted days, to find out what's happening at home. Because it could be that the consequence you can't measure in the school because the consequence is that Xbox at home. So when you're doing an FBA, a lot of times the first step is gathering that data, conducting those interviews, utilizing standardized rating forms such as the FAST, and observing like we talked about and analyzing that. When you take all of that data together, not just one person's opinion or not just one source of information, but you take the whole package, that's when you start to see a pattern of behavior. That's when you start to see really the sequence of behavior and how all of these things are laying out so that you can really look at, oh, every time this child does this, they get a lot of attention. They get attention from the classroom. They get attention from the teacher. They get attention from the secretary. They get attention from the principal. They get attention from their parents. And then they get attention from their grandparents. And you kind of start to see that. And you're like, wow, okay, we've got an attention problem here. Now we need to shift the attention. We need to start shifting our attention from that negative attention for the undesired behaviors to the positive attention for more desired behaviors. And that's where you go back to that memo by Todd Laughlin, where it says, if you're relying too much on consequent-based strategies, you're not relying enough on the positive side, on redirecting that function to the attention. And so, like I said, you have to identify that function of behavior. And if the function is attention, we need to teach them a new behavior. So this goes back to our skill-based. We need to teach a new behavior, and that's teach this new replacement behavior. Instead of being aggressive, now here's how you get your attention. And developing a plan, a comprehensive plan to give them a new way to get attention, to give them a new way to get that tangible item, to give them a new way to get out of a difficult task. And that's where it gets tricky in education, because you can't get them out of learning. So if you can't get them out of learning, how do you make learning easier? How do you make it simpler? So instead of running, how can we modify the assignment so that they can walk? Just like Karen asked, how can I walk? No, you can't run, or no, you don't want to run, but yes, you're willing to walk. Okay, how can our plan get you to walk? And if I can get you to walk for a mile every day, then I can start to get you to run for 30 seconds. So we aren't where we need to be, but can I develop a plan if the child doesn't want to engage in the difficult task, whether that's sitting still or sharing with friends or compromising in the classroom or reading? No, I cannot make that any easier, or I can't let you get out of it, but I can make it easier. So when you're looking at function-based intervention, so you go from your functional assessment, your FBA, to your intervention plan. It's key to make sure you get a good FBA, really find out what that function is, because then you're going to try and decide, how are we going to reinforce that? How are we going to put this into a behavior intervention plan? And so that's where you really start to look at what is the most appropriate reinforcer. Because if their function is attention, and you say, if you sit in your chair and you follow the rules for the day, you can have a pencil. You don't have a link between your function of attention and your reinforcer of a tangible pencil. They don't want a pencil, they want attention. If you say, if you do your reading assignment, I will give you game time. If they want to escape the reading assignment because it's hard and you give them game time, that's not necessarily going to work because the function is escape. They need some form of escape. What is that escape? Is it lessening the assignment? So if you do the first 4, I'm going to take away the last 5 on your assignment. If you do the first 4, I will help you with the last 5. So if the first 4 are done without disruption, I'll help you with the last 5. Or you do one, I do one. You do one, we do one. Something like that, okay? So you really have to rely on a good, solid functional behavior assessment to then determine how are we going to put together an efficient behavior plan. You want to use both your antecedent and your consequent-based strategies. So antecedent strategies are more preventative. How can you pre-teach ahead of time? How can you use visual timers? How can you use visual schedules? How can you really work on the front end to prevent the behavior from ever occurring so that you don't have to worry about how are we going to intervene when it does. Because if you can prevent it from the get-go, then you don't ever have to worry about how to stop it. And I think that's the thing that makes us most concerned as parents or teachers or even as interventionists is if it does happen, what are we going to do? But rather than focusing on what are we going to do if it happens, focus on how are we going to prevent it from ever occurring, not how do we respond? Because really once it started happening, it's crisis management. And then your consequent-based strategies, these are your reactive strategies that not only happen after the undesired behavior occurs, and it may be what you don't do. So a consequent-based strategy isn't just what you do, but it's also what you don't do. So if they are engaging in aggressive or disruptive behavior in order to get out of school, what are you not going to do? You are not going to allow them to get out of school. Because in allowing them to get out of school, you're perpetuating the problem. So consequent-based strategies aren't just what you do, but they're what you don't do. You don't allow that escape from school. You don't give that attention that maybe they're wanting. You don't allow access to those very specific tasks or activities that they're wanting. So they are what you do and don't do. And your consequent-based strategies are not just punishment, but they're also reinforcement. So when we're looking at our consequent-based strategies, what do we do in regards to the undesired behavior? But more importantly, what are the consequences of the skill that we are trying to build? So if we are trying to build sitting in your seat or working on that hard reading task or whatever that is, not only do we not look at what we do when we have undesired behavior, but what when they show the effort, when they try, what do we do? And make sure, like we talked about with those antecedent-based strategies, the expectations are clear. You've got to communicate the plan to the child. And that's one of the things, whether the child has ADHD or a learning disability or autism. Even with autism, you have to communicate. If they're nonverbal and it seems like they're out of touch with reality, they're not. They're really not. But how are you going to communicate it in a way that they can understand? And that may be using a visual story where we put it in pictures to tell them this is what you're expected to do and this is how we're going to respond. So it may rely on visuals, but make sure that whatever it is, there are clear expectations for you, for the kids, for the teachers, for other support staff. And you put it all together into a system. A lot of you might be familiar with like check-in, check-out. With check-in, check-out, that's great. But what are your reinforcers? What are they earning? Is that tied to whatever their replacement behavior is? And is it tied to the function of the behavior? If you aren't familiar with self-monitoring, I encourage you to maybe look into self-monitoring. Self-monitoring is a great strategy to use for kids with ADHD that may not be aware. They may be humming and clicking and swinging and moving and disrupting everything and not even know that they're doing it, just because they're just kind of hanging out doing it. Self-monitoring is a way to teach them to reflect and say, oh, oops, I'm off task and off task again. I need to work on getting on task. And it's a way to help them. Are you on task? To stay on task. Are you fidgeting? Yes or no? And make it fun, man. Behavior intervention can be so much fun. So use things like mystery motivators where, they draw something out of a hat, or if you can find those old Crayola pencils or Crayola ones, where you can write in your pen and then they can color over it, like what the reward's going to be. That's a fun one. Use pictures, make it colorful, make it fun, make it something that they want to do. And also you need to be excited about it. So their excitement is going to come from your excitement as well. And it shouldn't be something that, oh, we got to do this again. And, so-and-so's always in trouble and never trying and never working. It shouldn't be something. So I think sometimes checking our own attitudes about it is important. So big take-home message is never assume that a lack of performance is simply a lack of motivation. So always, always, always check that skill deficit and what are their abilities. So don't just focus on the undesired behavior and the disability, but what can they do? What is our baseline? What is our starting point? So make sure that you're looking at. A good example is, has anybody forgotten something you needed at the grocery store? And you go into the grocery store and you're like, I need one more thing. I need one more thing. What is that thing? And the more you try to think of what that thing is, the more frustrated you get and the less it's coming to your head. It's just like blank. Or trying to think of someone's name. And it's like, I really know their name. I cannot think of it. I cannot think of it. And the more you try, the more you can't try. Kids with autism and communication delays, that's what their life is like every day. What's that word? What is it that I want to say? And the harder I try to say it, the less it's there, and the harder it gets, and the more frustrated I get. So really look at what is their effort to engage in the correct behavior. So verbally requesting for those kids is a lot of effort. And it doesn't always get reinforced, so it's minimally effective. So if I say iPad, please, sometimes mom says yes, and sometimes mom says no. If I say, can I play on the computer, please? Sometimes my teacher says yes, and sometimes she says no. So it took me a lot of effort to say that, and it wasn't really effective. If I say, no, thank you, I don't want to do my math, that took a lot of effort for some kids, and it probably wasn't effective because the teacher is probably going to say, I don't care if you want to do your math, but it's math time and we have to do it because it's school and we've got to learn and it's important. And we understand from a cognitive perspective why that is important. So it's not likely to be effective. But if I scream and throw a fit and I'm aggressive, well, I'm probably not going to be doing much math today. And so it's often effective. And so what is the effort to engage in the correct behavior? What is the effort and where are those skill deficits with the incorrect behavior? So commonly missed skill deficits and impulse control. Those are things like sitting in your seat, waiting to be called on. So, ooh, 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 I know, and they just blurt it out. Waiting in line, sharing, taking turns, following multi-step instructions. So I need you to get your pens and your writing book and turn to page 25. They might be on 25 and not have a pen, or they might be on page 25 of their math book. So, following those multi-step instructions, deficits in fine motor skills, and that's something that's important to assess, that fine motor dexterity, because we often see that in kids that refuse written tasks because I was writing the other day in a journal for my daughter, and my hands were cramping so bad. And I had written like 1 page, but I just do so little physical sustained writing anymore that it really causes, because I type everything, really causes a lot of hand cramping. And so for our young kids, especially kids with fine motor delays, those written assignments may be due, or written refusal may be due to an underlying deficit. And deficits in social skills, a lot of our kids that are socially awkward, or maybe have high functioning autism, have a hard time with conversation. One of the tests that we do here, or is commonly done when assessing for autism, is just striking up a conversation but not maintaining it. So, I went to the zoo this weekend. If I say I went to the zoo this weekend to somebody who has good conversational skills, they're going to be like, oh, wow, who'd you go with? And what's your favorite thing? And what animals were out, or what animals did you see? And so you would talk about that. But an individual with autism or conversational deficits, you'll go, I went to the zoo this weekend. I like to play video games. Okay, well, we're not even on the same planet right now, but okay. Or they'll just say, okay. They don't understand that having the conversation, that back and forth. And so it really impacts their ability to engage socially in the classroom. Sharing a story. So tell me about your Christmas break. Tell me what you got for Christmas. Tell me what you did for your birthday. Sometimes individuals with deficits in social skills or in communication can't share those things. Recognizing their tone of voice when they're being too loud or too quiet. Maybe they whisper all the time. I had one that I worked with that was so frustrating, and he would just whisper all the time. It drove me nuts. And sometimes just not even saying anything out loud, and it was very frustrating. His was not selective mutism. His was truly having a hard time with his actual tone of voice and voice volume. Maintaining appropriate proximity, like when walking in line, and being able to be aware of your body and space may be a skill deficit. And so these are the kids that are always like out of line in the line, or too far back, or too close. That may be a deficit in social skills, or spatial body awareness. Deficits in academics, of course, you are probably well versed in this, but your reading speed, reading comprehension, learning to read, math computation, or early numeracy. Skill interventions that you may want to consider in addition to just your regular skill interventions. Don't forget to look into speech therapy. A lot of speech therapists are trained not only in articulation deficits, like saying your T's and your R's and your S's, but also in those more nuanced communication skills that can really be helpful for a child that maybe is having more behavioral concerns in social situations or settings. Occupational therapy is really making a name for itself and addressing some of those sensory behaviors, but also if you have somebody who is really, you notice a pattern that when it's a written task, check out those fine motor skill deficits and just make sure that there's not an underlying fine motor skill delay. Physical therapy is really important. If you notice that maybe behavioral concerns are more likely to happen outside on play equipment, or in PE, or physical education. Your social skills instruction, sometimes this can be conducted by a school counselor, or actually working on a social skill curriculum that you can build into the classroom. There are a lot of widely used curriculums out there, like the peers curriculum, or the children's friendship training are good curriculums for classrooms. Your special education teachers, and I know a lot of you guys are special education teachers, are really helpful. And then just other academic support. So, if a task is difficult and they're engaging in the behavior to get out of the task, we talked about how can you make the task easier. So what other academic supports can you put in place as far as, having copied written notes, or note guides, or calculators, or things like that, that can make those easier. So additional resources that you can rely on if you are struggling with shortened school day or all of those things is looking at the Special Education Resolution Center with Joanne and her team. Also, the Oklahoma Parents Center with Sharon Long and her team is a great resource to reach out to. And don't forget about your pediatricians. And I know this gets tricky for a school to recommend those outpatient therapies, because you don't want to recommend this in a way that makes it seem as if you are requiring it or that you would be stuck paying for it. But especially for families who are looking for additional resources, making sure that they know, even if they aren't getting speech or OT at school, maybe they don't qualify through the school, they can also talk to their concern or talk to their pediatrician about their concerns and look to see if they would qualify for additional services in an outpatient setting. And so you don't have to say that they should do that, but it's something they can talk to their pediatrician about, whether that's medication management for ADHD. If the child isn't getting an adequate sleep, they can talk to their pediatrician to see if they can resolve some of those sleep concerns, or other things that they can get. Most of these are covered by insurance, and would be something that, depending on the family, they could really maybe just need that direction. I wanted to share with you a couple of other resources. This presentation is meant to be an overview, but not a comprehensive presentation. And so I want to share just a couple of other resources that are available to you. So I'm gonna hold on just a second. As I navigate this, give me just a moment. Resources that are available through a partnership that we have with the Oklahoma State Department of Education, the Oklahoma Parent Center, and our office here at OPTC. And so we have a couple of resources that are available if you're looking for more videos or more training, especially on functional behavior assessment. That's something. So we do have a YouTube channel that is on everyday behavior. And so these are meant to be everyday strategies that you can utilize. This is talking about high intensity, low frequency behavior. It's what our series is on this this current month. And what that is like those kids that maybe threaten, make large threats, like I'm going to kill somebody or something like that. It's harder to do an FBA on those behaviors that occur every 6 months. It's really intense when it does happen, but it doesn't happen very often. So how do you do some assessments on that? But within the everyday behavior channel, when you go to that channel, there are playlists. And so each month we have a new series or a new playlist. And so you can see different things on maybe early referrals or school refusal, or like I said, this high intensity, low frequency behavior. And so you can see those playlists that are available, including there's some antecedent-based strategies for teachers that may be helpful for teachers who are looking for some of those antecedent strategies. Here's a functional behavior assessment that can be helpful. Skill-based intervention, this goes into more detail on skill-based intervention. Reinforcement, using effective consequences is discussing punishment and how can you be more effective in your punishment, maybe some consequent-based strategies for those undesired behaviors that you haven't had before or haven't tried before. So those are available to you, all free of charge, and you just have to subscribe or go on YouTube and select videos that you think are relevant to some of your concerns. Another area that you can go to is on Facebook, again with everyday behavior. If I can get to our page here. So this is the Everyday Behavior Facebook page. You can, if you're on Facebook or Instagram, not as much posts on Instagram just because of the rules on sizing and things like that. But you can also see every day something is posted on Everyday Behavior that aligns with those YouTube videos that talk about whatever the series is for that month. And so there have been some visuals that were part of the presentation today, including some of those on functional assessment. All of those are located in the photos of everyday behavior. And so all of those are available as resources to you or to parents. So this is also a good resource to share with parents. One other way to access those materials is by going to Everyday Behaviors. That does have an S on it, .com. And here are some tabs for parents and teachers. So if you would like some additional resources for teachers, here's kind of just a sample level plan that you can click on. And there's a video that goes along with this. So if you go to the YouTube series right here, and it'll share some of those resources that go along with that. Communication with parents, or functions of behavior, skill-based intervention, function-based behavior intervention. So this just links you to all of those resources, again, as a central location to link to some of those things. So like I said, this is not a comprehensive presentation. It's just kind of meant to be a general overview, but I do hope that you found this to be helpful and valuable information. We do have a little bit of time here for some questions at the end. What questions do you guys have? Oh, Joanne, you're muted.
Oh, I'm glad you could see that. We have one question already from Rebecca. What age and cognitive level do you think self-monitoring is viable opportunity for a child?
It depends. You can make it applicable for a younger child. I would say as young, so you're going to have to provide a little more support for your younger kids. So if you have like a 6-year-old, you're looking at those timers going off, and you may use this even as a whole class intervention. Just and if you go to Intervention Central, you can get a beep tape that will beep at regular intervals, or you can download an interval timer on your iPad or your phone. A lot of times they're in workout apps. And so that's where you download that interval timer, and that interval timer is going to beep. And when it beeps, the individual is supposed to ask themselves, am I on task or am I off task? And then they have to circle, they have to evaluate and circle. Most kids, even as young as 5 and 6, can say, yes, I'm on task, or no, I'm not on task. But the younger they are, the more likely they may be to fudge on that, or try to circumvent the system, or to not hear the sound, or whatever that is. And so younger kids may need more help, but I would say developmentally age 6. So for your, kids that have developmental delays, you're looking at the developmentally age 6 and up, and just recognize you may have to provide a little more support or a longer teaching period on how to monitor themselves early on. If they have severe ADHD, it's just going to take a little bit longer for them to learn that system, but it is something that they can learn when and that's the youngest I would probably do it. If you're up in your grade school age range, like your 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, yeah, go for it. What else?
If you have any questions, please go to the Q&A and type those in. I think, Marianne, you've done a great job at getting us an overview. And remember that this is going to be archived. So if you have teachers or principals, parents wanting to share with their spouses or with their relatives or with other parents, it's a great place to go to our website and click on this, because we still feel that struggle with people understanding what is behavior. And sometimes when I talk to parents on the phone, I'll say, what is your child's behavior? And they will say things like, well, he doesn't have bad behavior. And I have to stop and say, well, behavior is just the way we respond. So how is he responding in that environment? And, sometimes I just think we're still building the concept of what behavior is and how it can be managed. We're getting a lot of thank yous. I was going to ask you about any information sites that you could share, but your everyday behaviors is something that I'm subscribed to on Facebook. So I come up with all the new ones, and it just, you start with this broad base, and then there's just a lot of little things that you can go in there. So today, Marianne kind of showed us the tree. And then as we need to go out onto a limb or a branch and investigate more about what this is, what are antecedent strategies, what are this? So maybe this webinar that we're doing today can serve as a great purpose for an overview on behavior of people that may not really understand why we're addressing that, and how it's not just a punishable behavior, but it's a behavior that can be managed, and then give you some resources that you can reach out to expand learning within your district, within your family, with other parents. So I want to thank you, Marianne, so much. We've gotten just a lot of thank yous over there. Remember that Rob is going to send you an evaluation, and your feedback is really important. Remember on that feedback, if there's any other specific topics you would like to see in webinars, we'd love to hear those, because these will be ongoing. Even if we return to in-person trainings, we are still going to do these webinars, because as some people pointed out early on, it does give people a short window within their own place without travel to access some really great information. So we're excited about that. So Marianne, I want to thank you. Next month in February, we're going to have a Dr. Tracy Gershwin. She's from the University of Northern Colorado, and she's going to be talking to us about trust and building trust. And what is trust? What is the evidence-based? What does evidence tell us about trust? And I think it will be very helpful in these really trying times. So I want to thank you for being a part of today. And if there's no other questions, and I don't really see any others, then we will say goodbye. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.